so let's not even dance around it. You've seen the title, you already know. Yes, I think Rhodey is going to take up the mantle of Iron Man in the foreseeable future of the MCU. Yeah, wild concept, I know. But the idea of Rhodey taking up the mantle is not what interests me. It's actually the why, when, and how Marvel could execute the idea. So let's take a look at the why first. Why would Rhodey be the MCU's next Iron Man? Rhodey did take up the mantle in the comics for a brief period, and this is something that happened quite a while back, and I believe took place before he ever even became War Machine, so it was a little bit different, but still it was a nice change for his character at the time, and it was right after Tony had suffered a bad relapse with alcoholism and was therefore incapable of donning the armor himself. Now in the MCU, Stark hasn't had a thing with alcohol for a while now, but he is obviously incapable of donning the armor nowadays, which leaves a lot of room for Rhodey to come in, and with a little bit of tweaking they could easily do something similar. Taking it back to Avengers Endgame, obviously we know that Tony's family, Pepper and Morgan and Happy and even Rhodey himself were obviously crushed by his arguably needless death, but later with projects like Far From Home, we saw that it's not even just Tony's family. The whole world needs and misses Iron Man, and obviously we as the audience know that the loss of his character has created kind of an unexpectedly huge void in the Marvel landscape. Not only are our characters in all these wildly different directions and all these drastically different places, but the MCU as a whole has kind of lost its sense of direction, and I feel like that's partly due to the fact that they have lost their main hero. You know, Tony was the main character of the MCU. His arc lasted from the first phase to the end of phase 3, so as soon as his story wrapped up, it kind of felt like the story of the MCU wrapped up in a way, and now we're just living in a world without Iron Man. So how do we find a solution to this problem without undercutting the impact of Tony's story? The obvious answer to me is to bring back Iron Man, not bring back Tony Stark. Another character taking on the mantle and continuing the legacy of Iron Man, the role that he created and started, and having that familiar face around again that people can look up to, I think would do a lot for the hope of humanity. I think it's also important to note that when promoting Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, Kevin Feige explained that the reason Ant-Man got to kick off phase 5 with his movie is because they felt he'd earned that spot at the forefront of the MCU. That after all this time, he's more or less earned the right to lead the next phase of films because he's climbed the ranks of seniority since his first appearance. I think it stands to reason that Rhodey should absolutely get the same treatment, what with him having been around since the very beginning and whatnot. If anyone deserves respect and to lead at the front of the MCU, it's him. And what better way to show that than to have him take up the mantle of the universe's main hero? And it's something that we've started to see with other characters already. You know, we have our new Captain America, our Hawkeye, Hulk, Thor, Black Widow. The only one that we don't have is a new Iron Man. And from what I've seen from the fans, there are 3 main names that have been thrown around for who could take up the mantle other than Rhodey, and I just don't think that any of them are really viable. The first one being Pepper Potts, obviously, as we saw her suit up as Rescue in the Battle of Endgame. The reason I don't think she could carry on the mantle of Iron Man is because it simply does not fit her character at all. You know, her whole arc was just trying to get Tony to settle down and stop basically going manic and escaping into the suits. I don't think it fits her character in virtually any way to want to continue that legacy or do exactly what she told him not to do, especially now that she has to run the company by herself and take care of their child by herself. It just doesn't make sense to me. I think the only reason that Rescue was in Endgame was because they needed a good in-story reason for Pepper to be there when Tony died. Other than that, I just don't think we're really gonna see her that much again. And then obviously we have the second contender, which is arguably the fan favorite of the 3, which is Harley, the kid from Iron Man 3. And the main reason I think people want him back is because they think it's possible. Obviously we saw him cameo at the end of Endgame at Tony's funeral, and so a lot of people seem to think that that means he's back in the game now, but I honestly don't think so. I think that was just kind of a nice touch. It was supposed to be a scene about all the lives that Tony changed and impacted, and really I just think the inclusion of Harley was just a nice touch for Tony's send-off, and really wasn't much more than that. I don't think they're gonna bring him back into the fold of the story and make him more important. I don't have anything against it necessarily, I just don't think there's grounds to think that Marvel would do that, especially because a lot of what was great about his character in Iron Man 3 is the way that he bounced off of Tony and their dynamic together, and now that Tony's gone, I don't see Harley being that interesting King standing on his own 2 feet, they would have to make major changes, and I just don't think he would be as charming or endearing now that he's not just a lonely little kid anymore. I can't see it personally. And last but not least, we have RiRi Williams, who is, I think, probably the least favorite option to a lot of people. People have not responded well to her inclusion in the MCU so far, and it seems to parallel the reception she got when she first appeared in the comics, which is primarily why I think that she's not gonna replace Tony either, because when she got her own series in the comics, people saw her as a replacement when she became Ironheart. You know, Tony was dead. People hated that they were filtering out all these characters. You know, Miles Morales had become Spider-Man, Sam Wilson had become Captain America, and they were aging Steve out. Thor had just become unworthy. So then RiRi comes along and she just gets the worst of the hate because people were sick of it by then. So I think that Marvel Studios is going to want to avoid, you know, repeating the same mistake and causing any unnecessary hate to be sent towards the actress or anything like that. You know, she's had her own series in the works for a while now. She obviously had her own appearance in Wakanda Forever. So I really think that they're just gonna have her stick to her own stuff, you know, have her stay in her own lane. I don't think she's gonna be taking up the role fully and replacing Tony in any way or carrying on the mantle even. I think she's just gonna stay in her corner and do her own thing as Ironheart, and I think that's for the best, honestly. And obviously you could argue that Marvel's already establishing her as Tony's replacement, given that she already has her own fully functional suit, but I think there's a certain theme among the new Avengers that pretty much disqualifies her as a candidate. See, when you look at the rest of the replacements taking up the Avengers mantles, you might notice one thing they all have in common. They all have a pre-established relationship to their predecessors and an emotional connection driving them to keep the mantles alive. Yelena and Natasha were family, Sam was Steve's right hand, Jane was Thor's ex, Kate is Clint's partner, but RiRi, as far as we know, has never met and will never meet Tony. Rhodey, on the other hand, but considering the state he was in at the end of Secret Invasion, the idea of him becoming the new Iron Man might take some time to develop, which leads us to the when of this theory. When would Rhodey take up the mantle? I think the answer to this one is pretty obvious. If Rhodey's gonna take up the mantle, it's probably gonna happen in Armor Wars, which will most likely take place after Secret Invasion. And what's interesting is that there have been rumors for years now that Armor Wars is secretly a West Coast Avengers project in disguise. Now, I didn't believe these rumors at first, but when you look at the membership of the West Coast Avengers in the comics and then look at some of the future shows that have been announced, the rumors start to hold more weight. Not to mention the fact that Marvel originally announced Armor Wars as a series on Disney Plus and then more recently changed it to a full-on movie release. You know, to take all that time in development and pre-production to plan out Armor Wars as a show, so much so that you feel comfortable announcing the project, only to later change it seemingly out of the blue to a movie, it seems pretty sketchy to me. If they thought the project would work better as a movie, that's something that they would have figured out way earlier on, long before announcing it to people. But if we look at the change through the lens of these rumors, it starts to make a lot more sense. If this really is a West Coast Avengers project in disguise, it's perfectly understandable why Marvel would want it in the form of a movie rather than a show. Every single time an Avengers movie has been made, it makes at least $1 billion at the box office, whereas Disney Plus's shows seem to be progressively failing more and more as time goes on. So if they were going to use the Avengers name for a project, why would they waste it on a subscription service that's apparently been seeing nothing but diminishing returns? And for that reason, I think the rumors are true. I think Armor Wars probably is going to be a West Coast Avengers movie, and they just have yet to announce that, and I think Rhodey is probably going to take center stage as he accepts the Iron Man role during that movie, which leads us to the how. How will Rhodey end up taking the mantle? Combining everything we know and everything we've covered in this video, I think Rhodey's transformation will go a little something like this. After Rhodey's pulled back into the real world back in Secret Invasion, he realizes how long it's been. The last thing he remembers is getting shot out of the air and free falling as he fades into unconsciousness. Now he has woken up in a new world where his best friend is dead, half the Avengers are gone, and someone else has been living his life without him for years. So when Rhodey appeared in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and encouraged Sam to take up the mantle because the world's unstable and running low on hope, even though we know that may not have been him at that point, ironically, now Rhodey finds himself on the other end of it, in a situation similar to Sam's. Having to hear about Tony's death, process that, and understand that the world now needs a new Iron Man, maybe he'll struggle with the idea of taking up the mantle in honor of him. Hell, maybe since Armor Wars is set to release after Captain America New World Order, we'll see a new Sam Wilson fully integrated and embracing the role of Captain America. And maybe that Captain America can relay some of the advice that he got from fake Rhodey back to the real one and inspire him in the same way. If you go back and read the original West Coast Avengers comic, you'll notice that Iron Man was actually a member of the team when it was first founded, and if you read all the way through, you'll find that Iron Man at the time was none other than Rhodey himself. I think this is sort of the route that they'll take in the MCU, a West Coast Armor Wars combo. You know, there's a lot of Stark inventions still out there, and while yeah, Tony did always have good help protecting and managing his assets, there's still probably a lot of people looking for his tech now that the man himself is dead. I think Rhodey is going to struggle with his weird situation for a bit, lost time, dead friends, potentially ruined relationships, and feel pretty down for a while. Probably want to crawl into a hole and die, wondering if anyone will ever trust him again, and maybe the only thing capable of pulling him out of this rut is the fact that shady criminals are taking advantage of his dead friend's tech and ruining his legacy. But with so much Stark tech out there and so many people trying to get their hands on it, it might be too big for Rhodey to handle on his own. He might even be completely outgunned, maybe even so outgunned that he has to put a team together. And who would be better suited for this team than people who were directly affected by Tony Stark? For example, Wonder Man, one of my favorite members of the original West Coast team in the comics. Now, I'm not going to recap his entire origin, but basically he blamed Tony Stark for his own failures and basically turned evil, gained powers, joined the Avengers, became a good guy, and then eventually joined the West Coast Avengers. He's the perfect candidate, and his own series has already been announced. And who else was on the West Coast Avengers? Vision himself. Who was the direct cause of his existence in the MCU? Once again, Tony's to blame. Who else was on the team? Hawkeye and Mockingbird. They were actually the original founders and leaders of the team. But, you know, they seem to be out of the picture in the MCU, or at least they've been trying to be, which seems like all the more reason to me to have Rhodey lead the team in the MCU. So maybe reports and sightings of Stark tech being misused by organizations reminiscent of AIM and Hydra will lead Rhodey out west, where he'll meet with these heroes, both new and old, and work with them to rip this technology out of the hands of evildoers. Maybe Rhodey will clash with someone like Wonder Man on beliefs regarding Stark tech and Tony's legacy. Maybe just like in the comics, Wonder Man will blame Tony for the way his life is gone and see this misuse of Stark tech as a natural consequence of his legacy. And maybe Rhodey will naturally resist against that, having known Tony his whole life and having recently experienced what it's like to have a pretender taint your legacy. Maybe that's what this movie is at its core: legacies. James Rhodes protecting his friend's legacy to deal with the inner conflict of his own legacy being damaged. Maybe by stopping the theft of Tony's inventions and taking up the Iron Man mantle for himself, he can prevent anyone else from trying to sabotage Tony's legacy. Maybe he can control it as well as create a brand new legacy for himself. I mean, what better way is there to prop up a legacy character like Rhodey than to have him take center stage in a film all about legacies? And if that's not enough, let's take it back to that scene in Falcon and the Winter Soldier again. Even though that very easily could have been a Skrull in that scene, I think we could still say for sure that it did a good job representing Rhodey and his beliefs about the world. So for the purposes of this theory, we're gonna say that this scene still accurately represents Rhodey. This show was one of the very first projects that Marvel put out since Endgame, only coming after Far From Home and WandaVision. Maybe this was supposed to be a very significant moment in the MCU that was disguised to look fairly mundane on purpose. What if this scene was meant to show Rhodey encouraging Sam to take up the mantle of Captain America so that Sam could encourage Rhodey later on? Maybe our complaints about Phase 4 have been wrong the whole time. Maybe there has been a very clear direction for a lot of these characters that they've been setting up since the start and we just couldn't see it yet. Maybe this scene was put here to give us our first look at the new Captain America and the new Iron Man before they take up their respective mantles. One for the Avengers and one for the West Coast Avengers, so that when we see our new Iron Man and Captain America side by side in Avengers Secret Wars, we can trace back their growth over time and see how they've transformed and grown together because of one another. Maybe since the two hearts of the MCU, Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, were taken out of the picture in Avengers Endgame, Marvel thought to replace that heart with their partners. Or maybe Sam's just Captain America and Rhodey will just continue on as War Machine until Don Cheadle gets bored and stops signing contracts and they get rid of him unceremoniously, having achieved nothing of real significance for his character. But personally, I like my idea a little bit better. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, subscribe for more videos like this, and I will see you in the next one.